A rules-based and a risk-based approach. What is the difference? Germa, we've got a risk-based approach that applies to FICA. Explain to us what it means.
I think the most important difference and the most important aspect of a risk-based approach is you cannot have a tick box approach when you assess risks. So you cannot have a template for your RMCP, for example. You have to understand the risks in your organization. You have to understand the risks in terms of money laundering and the FICA Act. You need to understand how it applies to your business. You have to apply your mind and you have to assess it from there. So you have to create something from scratch. You cannot have a template, you cannot have a tick box. You create it based on the risks that you've assessed and apply it to your business.
So is it fair to say that every business will have a unique risk depending on its clients, depending on the area that it operates, the industry? Some industries pose higher risks than others, etc. So
even your interpretation of the risks and the act would be different.
And the timing of the life cycle of your own business as an accountable institution. Remember previously I mentioned that your RMCP, your approach to risk, should be aligned with your approach to risk in your business so that they're not too far different. So if you are in a startup phase and you are prepared to take on certain risks in exchange for the potential reward, then to my mind, nothing untoward in also being able to accept slightly higher risks in terms of your client profile, on condition that you've got mitigating steps and you can monitor and all of those good things. Businesses that are more mature may say, we don't want to deal with those clients. If they reach a certain threshold, we're walking away from them. So it's all relative to each other and to your business's risk profile.
And I think the most important part of a risk-based approach is explaining this and demonstrating this to your regulator. I think that's the hardest part, because you understand your risks, but you need to put it in writing and develop a document to explain that to someone else, and to obviously explain it to your staff as well and the people involved in your business.
Another conclusion that I've come to is that with a risk-based approach, the regulator looks at you to take the initiative, where the rules-based approach puts a number of rules in place. It could be a tick box exercise, but with a risk-based approach, it seems like the onus is moved from the regulator demanding certain things, where a risk-based approach is for you to assume and to assist the regulator in saying, this is the unique position of our business. These are the risks that we have identified, and this is how we're going to mitigate them. So there's a definite change in focus,
Absolutely.
But also a change in the accountability of it. Would that be a
very
sound
important
assessment?
Yes.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
From the perspective of the accountable institution. You know, one of the best examples or analogies that I've heard, and I think it was Professor Alwyn de Koker. He taught a course on anti-money laundering, but perhaps he still does at UJ. And he says, imagine if you're an accountable institution and you are adopting a rules-based approach. You are standing in front of a funnel, but you're standing at the thin end of the funnel. So you are very restricted in terms of what you have to put in. And we found that in the old regime, that only specific certain ID documents could be, proof of address had to be of a certain age. The aspect of getting reasonable certainty was completely eliminated because there were really strict prescripts of what you were allowed to accept as the old KYC, the Know Your Customer regime. But once you've made it through the thin end of the funnel and it starts to disperse at the back end, as an accountable institution, you incur almost no liability because it's no longer your problem. You complied with the requirement to put only the right stuff in. What happens with a risk-based approach turns that around. You are entitled to take small items, lots and lots and lots of things, and you push them through. But the result at the end is determined whether the regulator is satisfied with your approach or not. So you carry the burden and the responsibility for the open-ended approach that you've adopted up front.
But I think the advantage of the risk-based approach is that it's not one size fits all. So you can customize it based on whether you're a one-man only selling funeral insurance, or you're a large corporate bank, insurance company, collective investment scheme, or credit provider attorney. So your scale of your business, the complexity of your business, and the nature of what you're doing can allow you to customize on a risk-based approach. Whereas in the rules-based approach, you had to do X, Y, Z, and it didn't matter, which accountable institution you were. Now you can actually customize it to your own risks and then design your program accordingly and implement accordingly.
I do see 2 points here, however. I see a positive in the sense that you can be the master of your own destiny. You can, as long as you apply your mind and you are mature in the identification of the risks, to formulate your own risk-based approach. However, in some cases, one is never certain of how the regulator is going to interpret and whether their interpretation is going to be satisfied. So I do see that this is not a foolproof approach. However, I would somehow prefer to write my own manual if I'm serious enough about my business, to highlight that we have gone beyond the basics. We have truly given this a serious consideration of what are the risks from a FICA point of view. We demonstrate our knowledge pertaining to the key sections of the Act. We do our customer due diligence accordingly. We can demonstrate it, but largely I've taken control over what risks am I willing to take, but I've given it some serious thought. And there we can convince the regulator that we have taken all reasonable steps to mitigate our risks. I personally prefer an approach like this as opposed to a set of rules and I can tick the box. So is that a fair assessment of how you would interpret this as well?
Yes, absolutely, but it also makes it very daunting, and specifically if you are brand new to this piece of legislation.
And if you have to demonstrate and explain and justify and motivate this to...
Yeah, and I guess also because you're in the context of your own, whereas when the regulator comes, he's had the benefit of seeing so many different risk management and compliance programs that he kind of already has an expectation of what to see. So I think that's where the help of people that are doing this on a day-to-day basis can definitely guide and assist you in developing that plan.
I've recently had an experience where I was consulting with a jeweler, because they knew now, and they are one of the high-value goods providers. And we sat and made a list of their products and services which may pose higher risk than normal. And then out of the blue he comes and he says, oh yes, but I forgot. Very often we get people who bring all their old gold and they ask us to melt it and either make new jewelry or just give them their gold back. How does that rate? And for them it's very hard because they've never had to think about it in that way. They've never had to think about the process of money laundering in terms of placement, layering and integration, because each of those have different trigger points.
Let alone write it down in an RMCP.
Exactly. So it becomes challenging. And they says to me, well, then what happens if the same couple comes every 2 months and every 2 months they have new old jewelry? So it is challenging for a new entrant. Very, very challenging.
My final conclusion is the depth of your considerations and thinking about these things. We've already highlighted how important FICA is, how daunting and onerous it is. My final conclusion is I cannot see how an individual that specializes in a specific service can also be mindful of everything else. You would need to consult with someone in this field.
Absolutely.